The emergency room at Cedar Street Hospital smelled like bleach and fear, a combination James Cole had learned to recognize over the last 3 years. He sat in a plastic chair that was designed to be uncomfortable, probably to keep people from lingering, and watched the second hand tick around the clock mounted above the nurse's station. 8:47 p.m. Sarah had been stable for 20 minutes. 20 minutes since the monitor had stopped screaming. 20 minutes since his daughter's heart rate had dropped from 180 beats per minute back down to something that wouldn't kill her. His phone buzzed. Margaret Davis from across the hall, checking in for the 3rd time. James typed back a quick response, "She's okay, thank you," and pocketed the device before the nurse could tell him to turn it off. His hands were still shaking, not from the cold October air that had soaked through his work jacket when he'd been standing on the bridge, not from the adrenaline crash that came after pulling a drowning woman from the Riverside River, from the simple arithmetic of what almost happened. 15 minutes. That's how long it took to drive from the bridge to the hospital on a good day. He'd made it in 12, running 2 red lights and praying no cop would pull him over because explaining that his daughter was dying while he'd stopped to save a stranger wasn't a conversation he had time for. But the hospital had called at 6:47. He'd gotten Sarah's room at 7:23. 36 minutes. The doctor had been very clear about what another 10 would have cost him. James looked down at his jeans, still damp from the river. His shirt clung to his chest, October cold seeping through the cotton. Somewhere in the chaos of diving into black water and dragging a woman in a designer suit to shore and fielding questions from a police officer who seemed more interested in whether James had tried to steal the woman's purse than whether she was suicidal, he'd lost track of the fact that he was a father first and a rescue worker never. Sarah's doctor appeared in the doorway, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many close calls. "Mr. Cole, your daughter's sleeping. Heart rate's normal. We're keeping her overnight for observation, but the episode is past." James exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. "What caused it?" "The murmur we've been monitoring. It's progressing faster than we'd like. We need to schedule a consult with the pediatric cardiologist next week." "The surgery you mentioned last month?" "We're moving closer to that recommendation, yes. I'll have my office call you Monday with available appointments." The doctor left him with a clipboard full of discharge instructions that wouldn't matter until morning. James signed where indicated and made his way to Sarah's room, a small space at the end of the pediatric wing with walls painted to look like an underwater scene. Someone had thought fish and coral would be comforting to sick children. Sarah was asleep in the bed, an IV line running into her left hand, oxygen monitor clipped to her finger. She looked smaller than 7 years old, younger than she'd been this morning when she'd asked if they could get pancakes for breakfast, and he'd said, "Maybe this weekend, baby, Daddy's got to get to work." He pulled a chair close to the bed and took her free hand. Her fingers were warm, alive. The monitor beeped steadily, a rhythm that meant everything was working the way it should. For now. His phone buzzed again. Not Margaret this time. Unknown number. James almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him swipe to accept. "Mr. Cole?" A woman's voice, refined in a way that suggested private schools and coastal cities. "This is Rebecca Hayes, from the bridge." James straightened in the chair. "How did you get this number?" "The police officer gave it to me. I told him I wanted to thank you properly. Is your daughter all right? He mentioned you left in a hurry." "She's stable. Thank you for asking." A pause on the line, long enough that James wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "I owe you my life. I'd like to repay you." "You don't owe me anything." $50,000. That's what I'm offering. Wire transfer, cash, however you prefer. No strings attached." James looked at Sarah's sleeping face, at the medical equipment that was keeping her alive, at the discharge papers that would eventually come with a bill his insurance would only partially cover. $50,000 would pay for the surgery the cardiologist was going to recommend, would cover the deductible and the co-pays and maybe even the medications she'd need afterward, would solve every financial problem he'd been losing sleep over for the last year. He stood up, moved to the window where he could see the parking lot below. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to decline." "Mr. Cole, I didn't save you for money. That's not who I am. Everyone wants something. I want my daughter healthy. You can't buy that." Another pause. Longer this time. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had shifted. Less boardroom, more human. "The police said you jumped in without hesitation, that your daughter was nearby, that you chose me over her safety. I chose to stop someone from dying. That's all." "That's not all. That's everything." She cleared her throat. "I'm going to give you my personal number, not because I expect you to call, but because I think you're the first person in 2 years who's seen me at my worst and didn't want anything from me. That means something." James wrote down the number she recited, though he had no intention of using it. They said goodbye with the kind of formality that people use when they know they'll never speak again. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to Sarah's bedside. The nurse came in around 9 to check vitals. Sarah woke up long enough to ask where they were and why everything smelled funny. James told her they were having an overnight adventure at the hospital, that the doctors wanted to make sure her heart was being a good listener. She accepted this with the kind of trust that made his chest ache, then drifted back to sleep holding his hand. He stayed awake through the night, watching her breathe. Every beep of the monitor was a small reassurance. Every rise and fall of her chest under the thin hospital blanket was proof that he'd made it in time. Barely. But barely was enough. 3 days later, Rebecca Hayes showed up at his duplex. James had just gotten home from dropping Sarah at school. She'd been cleared to return with strict instructions to avoid physical activity and come straight to the nurse's office if she felt dizzy, when he heard the knock. He opened the door to find a woman in dark jeans and a gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup. She looked younger than she had on the bridge, less like a CEO about to jump to her death and more like someone who'd forgotten how to sleep. "Mr. Cole," she extended her hand. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced. You didn't call, and I needed to see you." James shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested she typed more than she shook hands with investors. "Ms. Hayes, I told you on the phone. I know what you told me, and I'm not here to offer you money again." She glanced past him into the duplex. "May I come in? I promise I'm not going to try to write you a check." He stepped aside, and she entered the small living room that still had Linda's furniture because James couldn't bring himself to replace the couch where his wife had read bedtime stories to Sarah. Rebecca's eyes swept the space, taking in the photos on the wall, the medical equipment in the corner that the insurance company had delivered for monitoring Sarah's oxygen levels, the breakfast dishes still in the sink because he'd been running late. "Would you like coffee?" James moved toward the kitchen out of reflex, the same way he offered beverages to the building inspectors and contractors who occasionally needed to review work orders. "No, thank you. I won't take much of your time." Rebecca remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her like she was delivering a presentation. 2 years ago, my husband killed himself. He left a note blaming me for choosing work over him. The board forced me to stay on as CEO for optics. Couldn't have it look like the company was unstable. I've been performing strength ever since. Perfect suits, perfect speeches, perfect quarterly earnings. And 3 months ago I started planning how to stop. James leaned against the kitchen counter, giving her space to continue. "The bridge was supposed to be my exit, clean, final, no more performing. Then you showed up." She met his eyes. "I was angry at first, furious that you'd taken away my choice. But I've had 3 days to think about it, and I realized something. You didn't save me because you thought I was worth saving. You saved me because it was the right thing to do. You didn't know I was a CEO, didn't know about my husband, didn't care about any of it. You just saw someone drowning and acted. That's what anyone would do. No, that's what you did. Most people would have called 911, would have stayed on the bridge and waited for professionals. You jumped into water cold enough to kill you both." James thought about the current, about the way it had grabbed his legs and tried to pull him under, about the moment when he'd gotten his arm around Rebecca's torso and realized she wasn't fighting him, wasn't helping, was just letting the river take her. "I grew up swimming in that water. I knew I could make it. You have a daughter with a heart condition. What if you hadn't made it? What happens to her? The same question that had been keeping him awake since Tuesday night. The same arithmetic he'd been trying not to calculate. If he'd drowned, Sarah would have gone to Linda's mother, a woman in her late 60s who loved her granddaughter but couldn't provide the daily care a sick child needed. Would have ended up in some version of foster care or distant relatives, her medical history a liability no one wanted to inherit. I made it, James said. That's what matters. Rebecca pulled something from her purse. Not a checkbook, a business card. I run Hayes Technologies. We're a mid-sized tech firm specializing in enterprise software solutions. We're also expanding our facilities management division and looking for someone to head it up. The position pays $120,000 a year plus benefits. Full medical coverage, including premium plans that cover pre-existing conditions. James took the card, read the embossed lettering. Hayes Technologies. Rebecca Hayes, CEO. A phone number and email address. You want to hire me? I want to offer you a position. There's a difference. I do building maintenance. I fix leaky faucets and replace ceiling tiles. I'm not qualified to run a facilities division. You have a degree in engineering from state. You worked as a facilities manager for Morrison Construction until 3 years ago, when your wife got sick and you stepped down to take care of her. You've been doing contract maintenance work since then to stay flexible for your daughter's medical appointments. You're overqualified, actually. You investigated me. I needed to know who pulled me out of that river and why. Rebecca's expression didn't change. I need someone competent who understands how buildings work and can manage vendors and keep costs down. Your resume suggests you can do all three. The fact that you saved my life is irrelevant to whether you can do the job. James set the card on the counter. I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept. Why not? Because I won't owe you my career. You feel guilty about almost dying, and you're trying to make it right by giving me something I didn't earn. That's charity, not employment. Rebecca's jaw tightened. I'm offering you a job interview, not a handout. You'd have to earn the position same as anyone else. And if I don't get it, if your hiring manager decides I'm not qualified, do you override them because you feel obligated? No. If you're not qualified, you don't get hired. But you are qualified, Mr. Cole, probably more than any other candidate we'd find. So the question isn't whether you can do the work, it's whether you're willing to interview for a position that could provide your daughter the medical coverage she needs. The words landed exactly where she'd aimed them. James thought about the cardiologist appointment on Monday, about the surgery that was coming whether he was ready for it or not, about the insurance he had through the contracting agency that covered basic care but drew the line at pediatric cardiac procedures that cost more than most people made in a year. I need to think about it. Of course. Take the weekend. The position will be open through next Friday. Rebecca moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm not offering this because I feel guilty. I'm offering it because I need someone good, and you're good at what you do. I watched you fix that elevator at the hospital Tuesday night while you were waiting for your daughter to stabilize. Took you 4 minutes to diagnose a motor problem the maintenance staff had been ignoring for a week. You didn't have to do that. You did it because you can't see something broken without fixing it. She left before he could respond. James stood in his quiet living room, holding the business card, doing the same calculation he'd been doing for 3 years. Dignity versus necessity. Pride versus survival. The man he wanted to be versus the father he needed to be. By Monday morning, he'd made his decision. The interview was scheduled for October 25th at 2 in the afternoon. James wore the suit he'd bought for Linda's funeral, the one that still fit but felt wrong because the last time he'd worn it, he'd been burying his wife. He arrived at Hayes Technologies 15 minutes early and sat in the lobby watching employees move through the space with the kind of purpose that suggested they actually believed in what they were doing. Rebecca had been true to her word. She wasn't in the interview. James met with a man named Gerald Stevens, the current facilities director who was being promoted to VP of Operations and needed someone to take over his old position. Gerald was in his 50s, balding, with the kind of direct manner that came from 3 decades of dealing with contractors who promised timelines they couldn't meet. "Walk me through your approach to preventive maintenance," Gerald said after they'd covered the basics of James's resume. James explained his system: monthly inspections, quarterly deep dives, annual overhauls, the importance of building relationships with vendors so that when something broke at 3 in the morning, you had someone you could call who'd actually show up. Gerald nodded along, occasionally making notes. They were 40 minutes into the interview when James's phone rang. He'd silenced it, but he could see the screen. Cedar Street Elementary, Sarah's school. "I'm sorry," James said, standing. "I need to take this." Gerald waved him toward the door. "Take your time." James stepped into the hallway. "This is James Cole." "Mr. Cole, this is Nurse Patterson at Cedar Street Elementary. Sarah collapsed during recess. We've called an ambulance. You need to get here now." The phone nearly slipped from his hand. "Is she conscious?" "She's awake, but her heart rate is irregular. The paramedics are en route." James was already moving toward the elevator. "I'm on my way." He didn't go back to the interview room, didn't explain or apologize or make excuses, just ran through the lobby and out to his truck, breaking every speed limit between the office park and the elementary school. The ambulance was already in the parking lot when he arrived, lights flashing, Sarah on a gurney with an oxygen mask over her small face. "Daddy!" Her voice was muffled behind the plastic. James climbed into the ambulance beside her, took her hand. "I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." The paramedic started an IV. "We're taking her to Cedar Street Hospital. Are you the father?" "Yes. She has a heart murmur. It's been getting worse." They rode in silence, broken only by the wail of sirens and the steady beep of the heart monitor. James watched the numbers, watched them climb and fall and climb again, each spike a reminder that his daughter's body was fighting itself. They pulled into the emergency bay at 3:47, the same ER he'd been in Tuesday night, the same doctor who'd told him they were moving toward surgery. She appeared in the examination room 10 minutes after they'd gotten Sarah settled. "Mr. Cole, we're going to run an echocardiogram and some blood work, but based on what the paramedics are reporting, I think we're past the point of waiting. Your daughter needs surgery." "When?" "Within the next 48 hours would be my recommendation. Her heart is showing signs of strain that we can't ignore." James felt the ground shift beneath him. 48 hours, 2 days. Less time than it took to process an insurance claim, let alone get approval for a procedure that would cost $40,000 even with coverage. "I'll need to check with my insurance." The doctor's expression went carefully neutral. "Of course. But Mr. Cole, I need you to understand the timeline we're working with. Sarah's condition is deteriorating. Waiting for insurance approval could mean waiting too long." She left him with Sarah, who had drifted into a medicated sleep. James pulled out his phone, called the number on his insurance card, navigated through automated menus until he reached a human being who asked for his policy number and date of birth, and explained that pre-authorization for cardiac procedures typically took 7 to 10 business days. "I don't have 10 days. My daughter needs surgery in the next 48 hours. "I understand, Mr. Cole, but the process requires review by our medical team to determine if the procedure is necessary." He hung up, stared at the wall where someone had painted a cheerful sun with a smiling face, thought about the business card still in his wallet, about Rebecca's offer, about dignity and pride and all the things that seemed vitally important until your child was dying and the insurance company was explaining their review process. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. "Mr. Cole, this is Rebecca Hayes. Gerald told me you left the interview. Is everything all right?" James looked at Sarah's sleeping face. "My daughter collapsed. We're at the hospital. They're saying she needs surgery within 48 hours, but my insurance won't approve it in time." Silence on the line. Then, "Which hospital?" "Cedar Street." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Ms. Hayes, you don't need to—" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she repeated, and hung up. True to her word, Rebecca appeared in the waiting room 19 minutes later, still wearing the business suit she must have had on at the office. She found James pacing near the vending machines and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What did the doctor say?" James explained the situation. The deteriorating heart valve, the 48-hour window, the insurance company's 7 to 10-day review process. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "How much will it cost?" "$40,000. That's after insurance coverage if they approve it." Rebecca pulled out her phone, made a call. "David, I need you to wire $40,000 to Cedar Street Hospital. Patient name Sarah Cole. Bill it to my personal account, not the company." "Yes, I'm sure. I'll send you the details in 10 minutes. She ended the call and looked at James. "It's done. The hospital will have the funds by end of business today. Sarah can have her surgery tomorrow." James felt something crack in his chest. Not relief. Something harder and more painful. "I can't accept that. Your daughter needs surgery. I won't owe you my daughter's life. You don't owe me anything. This is a gift. Gifts like this come with strings. They always do." Rebecca's expression hardened. "What strings? What exactly do you think I want from you?" "I don't know yet. But nobody gives $40,000 to a stranger without expecting something back. I gave it because your daughter is dying and you saved my life. That's the entire transaction. You helped me. I'm helping you. We're even." "We're not even. We'll never be even. Every time I look at Sarah after this, I'll know I couldn't save her myself. That I needed you to do it. That makes me a failure as a father." Rebecca stepped closer, and for the first time since the bridge, he saw real anger in her eyes. "You're not a failure. You're a man in an impossible situation being crushed by a system that puts profits over people. Taking help doesn't make you weak. It makes you a father who's willing to do whatever it takes. Including destroying my dignity. Dignity doesn't keep your daughter alive." The words hit like a physical blow. James turned away, looked through the window into Sarah's room where she slept, hooked up to machines. He thought about Linda, about the last conversation they'd had before she went into cardiac arrest. She'd made him promise he'd take care of Sarah no matter what it cost, no matter what he had to sacrifice. She'd known something was wrong with her heart even before the doctors did. Had known she was dying, and had spent her final weeks making him swear he'd put their daughter first. "There's a neighbor," James said quietly. "Margaret Davis. Lives 2 doors down. She's been watching Sarah when I have work. She lost her husband 10 years ago. Told me something I didn't understand until now." Rebecca waited. "She said pride is what you hold on to when you've got nothing left to lose. But when you've got something worth keeping, pride's just another word for stupid." He turned back to Rebecca. "If you pay for the surgery, I need it to be a loan, not a gift. A loan with a payment plan, $500 a month. I'll pay you back every cent. That'll take 7 years. Then it takes 7 years, but I pay my debts. That's non-negotiable." Rebecca studied him for a long moment. $500 a month, no interest. And if you miss a payment because something comes up with Sarah, we adjust the timeline. Deal? Deal. But I want it in writing. A contract. Legal and binding. I'll have my attorney draw something up." She extended her hand. James shook it and felt the last piece of his pride crack and fall away. Not destroyed. Transformed into something else. Something that looked like partnership instead of charity. It wasn't the same as standing on his own, but it was better than watching Sarah die because he'd been too stubborn to accept help. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning at 6. James spent the night in Sarah's room, holding her hand, listening to the monitor beep its steady rhythm. Margaret appeared around 8 with a care package, coffee, sandwiches, a book James wouldn't have time to read. She sat with him for an hour, not talking, just being present in the way that people who understand grief know how to do. "You're doing the right thing," Margaret said before she left. "Linda would want you to save Sarah, whatever it costs." The words helped. Not enough to silence the voice in his head that said, "Real men provide for their families without help," but enough to get him through the night. At 5:30 the next morning, the surgical team came to prep Sarah. She was awake but groggy, confused about why they were taking her somewhere without Daddy. James walked beside the gurney all the way to the operating room doors. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised, kissing her forehead. "You're the bravest girl I know." "Braver than you?" "Way braver than me, baby." They wheeled her through the doors, and James was left standing in an empty hallway that smelled like disinfectant and fear. He made his way to the surgical waiting room, a space designed to hold families through the worst hours of their lives. Uncomfortable chairs, old magazines, a television playing news no one was watching. Rebecca was already there. She sat in the corner, 2 cups of coffee on the table beside her. She looked up when James entered, and something in her expression made him realize she'd been there for a while, maybe all night. "I brought coffee," she said. "Wasn't sure how you take it." James sat down across from her. "Black is fine, thank you." They drank in silence. The clock on the wall ticked through the minutes. 6:15, 6:30, 6:45. The surgery was supposed to take 4 hours. James did the math. Sarah would be out by 10:30 if everything went well. If nothing went wrong. If her small heart could survive being stopped and restarted and repaired. "Tell me about your wife," Rebecca said. James looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because you've been sitting here for 15 minutes thinking about her, and I'd rather hear the story than watch you torture yourself with silence." He shouldn't have told her. Should have kept Linda private, protected, separate from the woman who'd bought his daughter's life with $40,000. But the waiting room was quiet, and the surgery was long, and Rebecca was the only person in the building who understood what it meant to lose someone and keep living anyway. "Linda was a teacher," James started. "3rd grade. She believed every kid deserved a champion, which meant she brought home work every night and spent weekends planning lessons. Drove me crazy sometimes how much she cared. How did she die?" "Heart attack. Sudden. I was at work in a meeting about HVAC systems for a warehouse renovation. She called twice. I sent it to voicemail both times because I was trying to impress the client. By the time I called back, the school had found her unconscious in her classroom. She died in the ambulance before I could get there." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "That's why you answered your phone during the interview. Can't make that mistake twice. It wasn't a mistake the first time. You couldn't have known. Doesn't change the fact that my wife died alone because I chose work over her." "Is that what you tell yourself? That you chose work?" James met her eyes. "It's what happened." "No. What happened is that you were doing your job and your wife had a medical emergency no one could have predicted. Those are 2 separate facts that happen to occur at the same time. Correlation isn't causation." "You sound like a therapist." "I sound like someone who spent 2 years blaming herself for her husband's suicide." Rebecca wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He left a note, 3 pages, single-spaced, a detailed list of every way I'd failed him, every late night at the office, every missed dinner, every time I chose a board meeting over him. And for 2 years I believed every word, thought if I'd just been a better wife, he'd still be alive. What changed? I tried to join him, stood on that bridge and realized that if I was right, if I really was responsible for his death, then killing myself wouldn't fix it. It would just add my failure to his. And if I was wrong, if his depression was bigger than anything I could have prevented, then dying was pointless." She looked at James. "You can't save everyone. Sometimes people die and it's not because you weren't good enough. It's because hearts stop and brains break and bodies fail. All you can do is save the people who are still here." The intercom crackled, a nurse's voice asking for the family of Sarah Cole to come to the consultation room. James stood so fast his coffee spilled. Rebecca was right behind him. They followed the nurse down a hallway to a small room with a couch and a box of tissues on the table. The surgeon appeared 2 minutes later, still in scrubs, mask pulled down. "The surgery went well," she said, and James felt his knees buckle. Rebecca caught his arm, kept him upright. "We repaired the valve and reinforced the surrounding tissue. Sarah's heart responded beautifully. She's in recovery now, and you'll be able to see her in about 30 minutes. James couldn't speak, could only nod and try to breathe through the relief that was crushing his chest. The surgeon continued, "She'll need to stay in the hospital for about a week. After that, 6 weeks of limited activity while she heals. Then a follow-up echo in 3 months to make sure everything's holding. But Mr. Cole, your daughter's going to be fine." After the surgeon left, James sat on the couch and put his head in his hands. Rebecca sat beside him, not touching, just present. They stayed like that until the nurse came to take them to recovery. Sarah was small and pale in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines. But her eyes opened when James took her hand, and she smiled. "Did they fix my heart, Daddy?" "They fixed it, baby. You're going to be okay. Can we get pancakes now?" James laughed, and the sound was so unexpected after 3 days of fear that it startled him. "We can get all the pancakes you want." Sarah noticed Rebecca standing near the door. "Hi, Miss Rebecca. Did you come to see my heart get fixed?" "I did. You were very brave." "I know. The doctor said so." Sarah yawned. "I'm sleepy now." She drifted off, and James stayed by her bedside while Rebecca made quiet calls to her office, rescheduling meetings and pushing deadlines. Around noon, Margaret appeared with actual food, sandwiches from the deli near James's duplex, fruit, cookies Sarah would want when she woke up. "You should eat," Margaret told James. "Can't take care of her if you collapse." He ate because she was right, not because he was hungry. Rebecca excused herself around 1, citing a board meeting she couldn't miss. Before she left, she pressed a business card into James's hand. "The interview," she said. "Gerald was impressed. He wants to schedule a follow-up next week when things settle down." James looked at the card. "I walked out in the middle of our conversation. You left to take care of your daughter. That's exactly the kind of person we want running facilities. Someone who understands what actually matters." She paused. "Think about it. No pressure. But James, you're qualified for this job. Don't turn it down because of pride or because you think you owe me. Take it because it's the right move for you and Sarah." She left before he could respond. James tucked the card in his wallet next to the contract Rebecca's attorney would send over for the loan. $40,000 at $500 a month, 80 payments. 6 years and 8 months of being in debt to a woman who'd tried to die and somehow ended up saving his daughter instead. Margaret settled into the chair beside him. "She's good people. I don't know her well enough to say." "You know her well enough. She showed up at 6 in the morning and stayed through surgery for a child she's never met. That's not obligation. That's character." James thought about the bridge, about Rebecca standing on the wrong side of the railing, ready to let go, about the 3 seconds he'd had to choose between running after Sarah and diving into water that could kill them both, about how that choice had led here, to a hospital room where his daughter was breathing easy because a stranger had decided to give him $40,000. "She investigated me," James said, "knew my work history, knew about Linda, knew I'd need money for Sarah's surgery before I even knew it myself. Smart woman. Calculated woman. I don't trust it." Margaret gave him the look she'd perfected over 10 years of being a widow who'd seen everything. "Baby, you don't have to trust her motivations. You just have to trust that the surgery happened and your daughter's alive. Everything else is details." Sarah woke up around 3 asking for water and those pancakes James had promised. The nurse brought ice chips instead and explained that solid food would come tomorrow. Sarah accepted this with surprising grace, probably because the pain medication was doing its job. James stayed through visiting hours and beyond, until the night nurse gently suggested he go home and get actual sleep. Margaret promised to take the first shift the next morning so James could shower and change. He left reluctantly, driving home through streets that looked different somehow. Lighter, less heavy with dread. His duplex was exactly as he'd left it 3 days ago. Breakfast dishes still in the sink, Sarah's homework on the kitchen table, Linda's photo on the wall, frozen in a moment when she'd been alive and healthy and convinced she had decades ahead of her. James picked up the photo, studied his wife's face. "I broke my promise," he said to the empty room. "Said I'd take care of Sarah on my own, but I couldn't do it. Needed help. Needed her." Linda smiled back from behind the glass, offering no judgment. Just the memory of a woman who'd loved their daughter enough to make James promise he'd do whatever it took. Whatever it took. Even if it meant accepting $40,000 from a stranger. Even if it meant taking a job he hadn't earned. Even if it meant letting someone else save the day when he couldn't save it himself. James set the photo back on the wall and pulled out his phone, found Rebecca's number, typed a message before he could talk himself out of it. "Thank you. For everything. I'd like to take that interview." Her response came 3 minutes later. "Monday, 2 p.m. Come ready to talk about your vision for facilities management. This time, don't answer your phone unless the hospital calls." James smiled despite himself. He spent the weekend at the hospital, watching Sarah's color return, listening to her complain about the food and the boredom, and when could she go home and see her friends. Normal complaints from a normal 7-year-old who didn't understand how close she'd come to not having a future. By Monday, she was stable enough that James felt comfortable leaving for a few hours. He wore the funeral suit again, arrived at Hayes Technologies at 1:45, and sat in the lobby until Gerald appeared to collect him. The second interview went better than the first. James had prepared a 10-year facilities optimization plan, working on it during the long hours sitting beside Sarah's hospital bed. He'd identified inefficiencies in the current system, projected cost savings, outlined a preventive maintenance schedule that would reduce emergency repairs by 35%. Gerald listened, asked pointed questions, and made notes. At the end of the hour, Gerald set down his pen. "We're prepared to offer you the position at $95,000 a year. Ms. Hayes wanted to offer $120, but I told her that would raise flags about nepotism. You'll earn your way up if you're good." James felt something shift in his chest. Not the job offer itself. The fact that Rebecca had tried to give him more and Gerald had negotiated down. That this was real. That he was being hired on merit, not charity. "I need to negotiate one thing before I accept." "Name it." "Premium health insurance for Sarah. Non-negotiable. If you can't provide coverage for her pre-existing condition, I walk." Gerald didn't hesitate. "Done. Our benefits package includes family coverage with no exclusions for pre-existing conditions. You'll be eligible the 1st of next month." "Then I accept." They shook hands. Gerald explained start date would be November 1st, giving James time to transition Sarah home from the hospital and get her settled. James left the building with a signed offer letter and the first real hope he'd felt since Linda died. He drove straight to the hospital, found Sarah awake and drawing with the crayons Margaret had brought. She looked up when he entered, and her smile made everything, the fear, the debt, the surrender of pride, worth it. "Daddy, I drew you and Miss Rebecca at the bridge. See?" She held up the paper. 2 stick figures, one jumping off a bridge toward another in the water below, hearts drawn around both of them. "That's beautiful, baby. Miss Rebecca saved my life, right? Because she gave you the money for the surgery?" James sat on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, she did. So you saved her, and she saved me. That means we're even." Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. James looked at his daughter's drawing, at the simple truth she'd captured that he'd been too proud to see. Saving wasn't a transaction, it was a cycle. You helped someone, they helped someone else, and eventually it came back around. Rebecca hadn't saved Sarah to repay a debt. She'd saved Sarah because she could, because James had shown her that choosing to save someone was its own reward. He tucked the drawing into his wallet, right next to the business card and the contract he'd signed. Evidence that dignity didn't have to mean doing everything alone, that accepting help from someone who offered it freely wasn't weakness, that sometimes the strongest thing a man could do was admit he couldn't save the world by himself. Sarah was discharged on November 2nd with strict instructions and a follow-up schedule that would govern their lives for the next 6 months. James carried her to the truck, buckled her into the booster seat, and drove home slowly because every pothole felt like a threat to her healing heart. Margaret was waiting at the duplex with dinner already made. Rebecca had sent flowers, sunflowers, bright and alive, with a card that read, "Congratulations on your new beginning." James set them on the kitchen table where Sarah could see them and felt something like gratitude settle in his chest. That evening, after Sarah was asleep and Margaret had gone home, James sat at his kitchen table and wrote out a budget. $95,000 a year, minus taxes. Sarah's medical expenses, the $500 a month to Rebecca, rent and utilities and groceries and everything else that made up a life. The numbers worked. Barely. But they worked. He thought about the bridge, about the 3 seconds he'd had to choose, about how that choice had led to this moment, sitting in his kitchen with his daughter alive upstairs and a future that looked like something other than survival. His phone buzzed. Rebecca. Heard Sarah's home. "How is she?" James typed back, complaining about bed rest, asking when she can play soccer again. So basically perfect. The response came quickly. "Good. See you Monday. Don't be late." He wouldn't be. James's first day at Hayes Technologies started with a broken elevator and 3 angry contractors who'd been waiting in the lobby since 6 in the morning. He arrived at 7:30, still getting used to the commute, and found Gerald waiting with a clipboard and a resigned expression that suggested this was some kind of test. "Motor's been acting up for 2 weeks. Maintenance company keeps saying they'll get to it. Haven't yet." Gerald handed over the clipboard. "Your facilities now. Fix it." James studied the elevator panel, recognized the clicking sound that meant a worn drive belt, and made 2 phone calls. The first to the maintenance company to cancel their contract effective immediately. The second to a supplier he'd worked with at Morrison Construction who could deliver a replacement belt by noon. By 1 o'clock, the elevator was running smooth, the contractors were happy, and Gerald was nodding approval. "Ms. Hayes said you couldn't see something broken without fixing it. She wasn't wrong." The work itself was familiar territory. HVAC systems that needed updating, plumbing that violated code, electrical panels installed by contractors who'd taken shortcuts James could spot from across a room. He spent his first week doing assessments, building a database of everything that needed attention, prioritizing by safety and cost. By Friday, he had a presentation ready for the executive team. Rebecca sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by department heads who looked skeptical that the new facilities guy had anything worth saying. James pulled up his first slide, a thermal image of the building's exterior showing heat bleeding through inadequate insulation. "We're losing $400,000 a year in wasted energy. I can cut that in half with a targeted insulation upgrade that'll pay for itself in 18 months. He clicked to the next slide. Maintenance log showing emergency repair costs. "We're spending $600,000 annually on crisis fixes because we don't have a preventive schedule. I'm proposing a system that'll reduce that by 35% in year 1. The CFO, a woman named Patricia Moore, who'd been with the company for 20 years, leaned forward. "What's the upfront investment?" $1.2 million, but the ROI is 22 months, and after that it's pure savings. Patricia made notes. Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but James caught the slight nod that meant keep going. He walked them through the full 10-year plan. Infrastructure upgrades, vendor consolidation, energy management systems. By the time he reached the final slide, even the skeptics were asking questions that sounded more like interest than doubt. After the meeting, Gerald pulled him aside. "That was good work. Ms. Hayes wants to see you in her office." Rebecca's office occupied the corner of the top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was standing at one of them when James entered, coffee cup in hand, studying something in the distance. "Your presentation impressed the board. Patricia already approved the budget." Rebecca turned to face him. "How's Sarah?" "Good. Follow-up appointment next week, but the cardiologist says everything looks stable. And you? How are you adjusting?" The question caught him off guard. Most executives didn't ask about adjustment. They assumed if you were doing the work, you were fine. "Still getting used to the commute, the responsibility, having a salary that doesn't depend on how many toilets I fix that week." Rebecca's mouth curved slightly. You'll adapt. You're good at this, James. Better than you think. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you well enough. You jumped into a freezing river for a stranger. You walked out of an interview to save your daughter. You negotiated a loan instead of accepting charity. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. James shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise he hadn't earned yet. I should get back to work. Before you go, Saturday night I'm having dinner at my place. Nothing formal, just a chance to get to know the new VP of Facilities outside the office. Bring Sarah if Margaret can't watch her. It wasn't really a request. James nodded and left before she could see the unease on his face. Dinner at the CEO's house felt like crossing a line from professional to personal, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. Saturday came too fast. Sarah was excited about meeting Miss Rebecca again, had spent Friday evening drawing a thank you card decorated with hearts and flowers. Margaret agreed to babysit but gave James a knowing look that suggested she saw exactly what he was trying not to see. Rebecca's house surprised him. Not a penthouse or mansion, but a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that looked middle class. Nice cars in driveways, kids' bikes on lawns. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, hair down, no makeup. She looked younger without the CEO armor. Come in. Sarah, I love your dress. Is that purple? Sarah beamed. It's my favorite color. My mama liked purple too. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression. Softness replacing the usual control. Your mama had good taste. I have lemonade if you want some. She led them to a kitchen that looked barely used. Stainless appliances still gleaming, counters clear of the clutter that accumulated in actual cooking spaces. Rebecca poured lemonade for Sarah and wine for the adults, and they moved to the living room where furniture sat arranged like a showroom. You don't spend much time here, James observed. I bought it 2 years ago because the board thought a CEO should own property. But you're right. I'm usually at the office. Rebecca handed Sarah the lemonade. I don't really know how to be home. Sarah took the glass carefully, mindful of the white couch. Miss Rebecca, do you know how to make dinner? I know how to order takeout. Does that count? Daddy says cooking is important. It's how you take care of people. Rebecca met James's eyes over Sarah's head. Your daddy's very wise. They ordered pizza because Rebecca's kitchen offered no alternatives. While they waited, Sarah explored the house with the unself-conscious curiosity of children. She found a piano in the study, dusty from disuse, and asked if she could play. Rebecca said yes, and Sarah picked out a simple melody she'd learned in music class. My mama used to sing this song. She had a pretty voice. James felt his chest tighten. Sarah rarely talked about Linda anymore. The therapist said that was normal, that children processed grief differently than adults. But hearing her mention it so casually to Rebecca felt significant. Rebecca sat beside Sarah on the piano bench. What else did your mama like to do? She liked reading stories, and she made really good cookies, the chocolate chip kind with the edges that get crispy. Sarah played another note. Do you have a mama, Miss Rebecca? I did. She died when I was young, like yours did. Did it make you sad? Very sad. For a long time. Daddy says it's okay to be sad sometimes. He says feelings are like the weather. Sometimes it rains, but the sun always comes back. Rebecca glanced at James. Your daddy's right about that, too. The pizza arrived, and they ate at the dining room table that looked like it had never been used for an actual meal. Sarah chattered about school, about her friends, about the Halloween costume she wanted to make. Rebecca listened with an attention that seemed genuine, asking follow-up questions, laughing at Sarah's stories about her friend Emma's pet hamster. After dinner, Sarah asked if she could draw. Rebecca found paper and crayons, new, like she'd bought them specifically for tonight, and Sarah settled on the floor to create. James helped Rebecca clean up the pizza boxes, both of them moving around each other in the unfamiliar kitchen. Thank you for coming, Rebecca said quietly. I know this is outside normal work boundaries. Sarah wanted to see you. She's been asking about you since the hospital. And you? Did you want to see me? James considered the question. Truth was complicated. Rebecca had saved his daughter's life, given him a job, treated him with more respect than most people showed building maintenance workers. But she'd also investigated him, showed up at his house unannounced, inserted herself into his life in ways that felt both helpful and invasive. I wanted to understand you better, figure out why you're doing all this. All what? The job, the dinner invitation, acting like we're friends when we're employer and employee. Rebecca leaned against the counter. Maybe I need a friend. Maybe I'm tired of every relationship in my life being transactional. We're transactional. I owe you $40,000. You don't owe me anything. That money was a gift regardless of what the contract says. Then why make me sign a contract? Because you needed to believe you earned Sarah's surgery. I gave you the paperwork so you could keep your dignity. Rebecca met his eyes. I'm not trying to control you, James. I'm trying to be honest with someone for the first time in 2 years. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding up her drawing. 3 people at a table, pizza slices sketched in crayon, labels underneath. Daddy, Miss Rebecca, me. I made us a family picture. James felt something shift in his chest. Not discomfort exactly, something closer to fear. The fear that Sarah was getting attached to someone who might not stay, that he was letting his daughter build hope around a woman he barely knew. Rebecca seemed to sense his hesitation. Sarah, that's beautiful. Can I keep it? Really? Really. I'll put it on my refrigerator so I can see it every day. Sarah glowed with pride. Rebecca found a magnet and attached the drawing to the otherwise empty fridge, and James watched his daughter beam at this woman who'd tried to die 3 weeks ago and somehow ended up hosting pizza dinners instead. They left around 8. Sarah fell asleep in the truck on the drive home, exhausted from the excitement. James carried her inside, got her into pajamas, tucked her into bed. She mumbled something about Miss Rebecca being nice before drifting off completely. Margaret was waiting in the living room when he came back downstairs. How was dinner? Fine. Sarah had a good time. And you? James sat on the couch that still had Linda's favorite throw blanket draped over the back. I don't know what I'm doing, Margaret. Rebecca's my boss. She paid for Sarah's surgery, and now Sarah's drawing family pictures with her in them. Baby, that woman drove to the hospital at 6 in the morning and sat through your daughter's surgery. She didn't do that because you're her employee. She did it because she cares. She doesn't know us well enough to care. Sometimes caring happens fast, especially when someone saves your life and you're trying to figure out how to pay it back. James looked at Linda's photo on the wall. It feels like I'm moving on too fast. Linda's only been gone 3 years. Linda's gone, baby. And she wouldn't want you spending the rest of your life alone because you think mourning has a schedule. Margaret stood, collected her purse. That Rebecca, she's good people. Little broken maybe, but good. And sometimes broken people fit together better than whole ones. After Margaret left, James sat in the quiet house and thought about Rebecca's empty refrigerator, her unused kitchen, her admission that she didn't know how to be home. Thought about the way she'd listened to Sarah talk about Linda without trying to compete or replace. Thought about the drawing now hanging on her fridge. His phone buzzed. Rebecca. Thank you for coming tonight. Sarah's wonderful. You're raising her right. James typed back. She liked you. Asked if we could visit again. The response came quickly. Anytime. Doors always open. He set the phone down and tried not to think about what it meant that his daughter was already building Rebecca into their lives. Tried not to calculate the risks of letting someone in who'd been suicidal a month ago. Tried not to notice the way his chest had felt lighter sitting in Rebecca's kitchen than it had in months. Monday brought a new crisis. The HVAC system in the server room failed over the weekend, and the IT department was in full panic mode. James spent the morning sourcing emergency cooling units and negotiating with contractors who wanted to charge triple for rush service. By noon, he had the temperature stabilized and a permanent fix scheduled for next week. Gerald found him in the mechanical room checking pressure readings. Ms. Hayes wants you in her office, now." James climbed the stairs 2 at a time, expecting praise for handling the crisis. Instead, he found Rebecca with a man who looked like an older, colder version of her. Same sharp features, same expensive suit. But where Rebecca's eyes showed warmth when she let her guard down, this man showed nothing but calculation. "James, this is Richard Hayes, my late husband's brother. He's our COO." Rebecca's voice was carefully neutral. Richard extended his hand without standing. "The facilities manager who's making waves. Gerald speaks highly of you." James shook, noting the weak grip, the way Richard's eyes swept over his work clothes with barely concealed disdain. "Just doing my job." "And doing it well, from what I hear. $2 million in projected savings. Impressive for someone who was fixing leaky faucets a month ago." The words landed exactly where Richard intended them. A reminder that James was working class, that he didn't belong in executive conversations, that his presence here was anomalous. Rebecca's jaw tightened. James earned his position through competence and experience. The board approved his hiring unanimously. "Of course they did, after you personally vouched for him." Richard finally stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "I'm not questioning his qualifications, just noting the unusual circumstances of his employment." "What unusual circumstances?" "That he saved your life and ended up with a 6-figure job a week later. Some might call that fortunate timing." James felt heat rise in his chest. "If you're suggesting—" Rebecca cut him off. "Richard, if you have concerns about hiring practices, take them to HR. James's performance speaks for itself." "I'm sure it does." Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just want to make sure we're maintaining professional boundaries. Wouldn't want the board to think nepotism is becoming company policy." He left without another word. The silence he left behind felt heavy with implications. James turned to Rebecca. "What was that about?" "Richard's been angling for CEO since my husband died. The board blocked him twice. He sees you as evidence that I'm making emotional decisions instead of business ones." "Am I?" "Are you what?" "Evidence that you're making emotional decisions." Rebecca moved to the window, same position she'd been in the day she'd invited him to dinner. "You're evidence that I believe in hiring competent people regardless of how I met them. Richard wants to turn that into something inappropriate. Don't let him. He's going to investigate, check my background, look for reasons to prove I'm not qualified." "Let him look. You are qualified. And if he tries to use our personal connection against you, he'll have to explain why he thinks the CEO shouldn't be allowed to hire the best candidate for a position." James wanted to believe her, wanted to think his 10-year plan and energy savings were enough to silence critics, but he'd been working class long enough to know how these things worked. Richard would find something, a mistake from his past, a job he'd left under less than perfect circumstances, something to weaponize. The rest of the week felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. James threw himself into work, implementing the first phase of his facilities plan, building relationships with vendors, proving through action that he deserved his position. But Richard's words echoed every time he walked past the executive floor. Friday afternoon, Sarah had her follow-up appointment with the cardiologist. James left work early, picked her up from school, drove to the medical complex where they'd spent so many hours over the past month. The waiting room was familiar now. Same magazines, same aquarium in the corner, same nurses who knew Sarah by name. Dr. Martinez called them back, ran an echocardiogram, listened to Sarah's chest with the kind of attention that made James's pulse quicken. Finally, she pulled off her stethoscope and smiled. "Everything looks excellent. The repair is holding. Heart rate's normal. No signs of strain." She turned to Sarah. "Young lady, you can go back to regular activities. No more bed rest." Sarah's face lit up. "Can I play soccer?" "Start with walking, work up to running. But yes, eventually soccer." On the drive home, Sarah chattered about all the things she wanted to do now that she wasn't sick anymore. James listened, feeling the weight he'd been carrying since October finally start to lift. His daughter was going to be okay. The surgery had worked. Everything else, the debt, The job complications, the confused feelings about Rebecca, was secondary to that fact. He texted Rebecca the news. "Cardiologist says Sarah's perfect. Thank you for making that possible." Her response came immediately. "That's wonderful. We should celebrate. Dinner tomorrow? I'll actually cook this time." James hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Dinner again felt like crossing another line, like admitting this was more than boss and employee, more than creditor and debtor. Something that didn't have a name yet but was starting to feel inevitable. He typed, "Sarah would love that." What he didn't type, "So would I." Saturday evening they drove to Rebecca's house with Sarah clutching a new drawing she'd made, this one featuring hearts and the words, "Thank you, Miss Rebecca," in careful 7-year-old printing. Rebecca answered the door looking nervous in a way James hadn't seen before. Less CEO, more regular person worried about making a good impression. "I should warn you, I'm not a great cook, but I tried." She led them to the kitchen where something that might have been lasagna sat cooling on the counter. "YouTube said this was easy. YouTube lied." The lasagna was overcooked around the edges and slightly runny in the middle, but Sarah ate it enthusiastically and declared it delicious. They sat at the dining room table that was slowly starting to look less like a showroom, and Sarah told Rebecca about soccer tryouts next month. "Will you come watch me play, Miss Rebecca?" Rebecca glanced at James, seeking permission. He nodded slightly. "I'd love to watch you play." After dinner, Sarah asked if Rebecca wanted to see a game on her tablet. Rebecca said yes, and they sat together on the couch while Sarah explained the rules of some complicated adventure involving dragons and princesses. James cleaned up the kitchen, giving them space, watching through the doorway as his daughter leaned against Rebecca's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah fell asleep halfway through the game, head on Rebecca's lap. Rebecca looked up at James with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not trapped, not uncomfortable, something softer. "She trusts you," James said quietly, moving to the couch. "I don't know why. I'm not good with kids. You're good with her. That's what matters." Rebecca's hand rested carefully on Sarah's shoulder. "My husband and I never had children. He wanted them. I kept saying we had time, that I needed to stabilize the company first, and then he was gone, and time was something we'd run out of. You couldn't have known. That's what everyone says, that I couldn't have predicted his depression would get that bad, that his suicide wasn't my fault." She looked down at Sarah's sleeping face. "But I chose work over him every single day, chose board meetings and investor calls and quarterly earnings over the person who needed me most, and now I get to live with that." James sat beside her, careful not to wake Sarah. "You're choosing differently now." "Am I? Or am I just replacing one obsession with another, using you and Sarah to fill the void my husband left? Is that what you think you're doing?" "I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that when I'm with you two, I feel less like I'm performing and more like I'm living. And that scares me because every time I've let myself care about something, I've destroyed it." The admission hung between them. Sarah shifted in her sleep and James scooped her up carefully. "I should get her home." Rebecca walked them to the door. Before they left, she touched James's arm. "I meant what I said. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I don't want to stop." "Stop what?" "This. Whatever this is. You and Sarah make me feel like maybe I'm not as broken as I think I am." James looked at her hand on his arm, at the vulnerability in her eyes, at the woman who'd tried to end her life 6 weeks ago and was now cooking bad lasagna and playing games with his daughter. "You're not broken. You're just learning how to be someone other than a CEO." "What if I don't know how?" "Then we figure it out together." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Rebecca. But they felt true, felt like the start of something that went beyond gratitude or obligation or professional respect. Sarah stirred. James shifted her weight and Rebecca opened the door. "See you Monday?" "See you Monday." On the drive home, Sarah woke up enough to ask a question. "Daddy, is Miss Rebecca going to be my new mama?" James's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why would you ask that? Because you smile at her the way you used to smile at Mama, and she's nice to us, and you said broken people fit together better. You heard me talking to Margaret? I hear lots of things. So is she? James pulled into their driveway, turned off the engine. I don't know, baby. Maybe someday. But right now, she's our friend. And friends are important too. Okay. I like her being our friend. Sarah yawned. I think Mama would like her too. That night, after Sarah was asleep, James sat at his kitchen table and looked at Linda's photo. 3 years of grief had softened the edges of memory, turned his wife into someone he could talk to without falling apart. I think I'm falling for her, he said to the picture. I didn't mean to, wasn't looking for it. But she's there, and Sarah loves her, and I don't know how to stop it from happening. Linda smiled back, frozen in time, offering no judgment. Just the memory of a woman who'd made him promise to stay open to life. His phone buzzed. Rebecca again. I need to tell you something. Can you come by the office early Monday, before anyone else arrives? James felt unease settle in his stomach. Early morning meetings never meant good news. What's wrong? Her response took 5 minutes. Richard's calling an emergency board meeting. He found something. We need to talk before it happens. James arrived at Hayes Technologies at 6 Monday morning to find Rebecca already in her office, surrounded by paperwork that looked like it had been reviewed multiple times. She glanced up when he knocked, and the exhaustion on her face told him she hadn't slept. Richard compiled a timeline. Rebecca pushed a folder across her desk. Bridge rescue October 15th. Your daughter's emergency the same day. First interview October 25th. Surgery October 26th, paid with my personal funds. Board meeting October 28th where you defended me. Hired November 1st. He's arguing the whole sequence proves nepotism and conflict of interest. James opened the folder, scanned the documents Richard had assembled. Bank transfers, hospital records, employment contracts. Everything arranged to make it look like Rebecca had bought herself a loyal employee. He's going to present this at the board meeting? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He's calling for my removal as CEO and your termination as VP of Facilities. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. He's not wrong about the optics. The timeline does look suspicious if you don't know the context. Then we give them the context. Explain that I turned down your first job offer, that I interviewed twice, that I negotiated my salary down. Richard will say I coached you on what to say in interviews, that Gerald was pressured to hire you because I wanted it. She rubbed her eyes. He's been building this case for weeks, talking to board members, planting doubts about my judgment. James set down the folder. What do you need from me? Honestly? I don't know. If we fight this together, it confirms Richard's narrative that we're inappropriately close. If you stay silent, it looks like you're hiding something. I won't stay silent while someone questions my qualifications. Your qualifications aren't the issue. The issue is that you saved my life and ended up with a 6-figure salary a week later. Richard's going to make the board choose between believing that's coincidence or corruption. James thought about his facilities plan, about the $2 million in savings he'd projected, about the HVAC crisis he'd solved, and the vendors he'd negotiated with. None of it would matter if the board decided he was Rebecca's pet project instead of a legitimate hire. What if I resign? Remove the conflict before the meeting happens? Then Richard wins. He gets rid of both of us, me for poor judgment, you for being the evidence of it. Rebecca stood, moved to the window where morning light was starting to break over the city. I should have seen this coming. Should have known he'd weaponize anything I did that looked remotely personal. You helped a man save his daughter's life. That's not a crime. It is if I'm also his employer. The board has fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. They can't ignore potential conflicts of interest just because the outcome was good. James joined her at the window. Outside, early commuters were starting to fill the parking lot. Regular people going to regular jobs where saving someone's life didn't create corporate crises. My wife died because I was in a meeting I thought was important. I sent her calls to voicemail because I was trying to impress a client who didn't matter." His reflection in the glass looked older than 38. "I promised myself I'd never make that mistake again, that I'd never choose work over people. And now you're asking me to watch you lose your company because I needed help saving Sarah. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what's coming so you're prepared." "Then prepare me for this." James turned to face her. "Tomorrow at that board meeting, I'm going to tell them the truth. All of it. That you offered me money and I refused. That you offered me a job and I refused. That every single thing I have, I earned by being good at what I do. And if they don't believe me, if they decide my word isn't worth anything because I'm working class and you're the CEO, then I'll resign. But I won't let you go down alone for helping me." Rebecca's eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, something sharper. "You'd give up this job? The insurance Sarah needs?" "I'd give up anything before I let people think I'm the kind of man who uses his daughter's illness to manipulate his way into positions he doesn't deserve." The words hung between them, and James realized he'd just defined something he hadn't fully understood until now. Dignity wasn't about refusing help, it was about refusing to let help become obligation, about maintaining the line between gratitude and indebtedness. Rebecca moved closer, and for a moment James thought she might touch him. Instead, she just stood there, close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes that makeup usually hid. "I've been running this company for 2 years by making safe choices, calculated decisions that protected shareholders and quarterly earnings in my position, and every single one of those choices made me more miserable." Her voice dropped. "You make me want to make different choices. Reckless ones. The kind that might destroy everything I've built but feel more real than anything I've done since my husband died." "What kind of choices?" "The kind where I stop pretending I hired you just because you're qualified. Where I admit that I wanted you here because you're the first person in years who's treated me like I'm human instead of a position." James's pulse quickened. "Rebecca, I know, it's inappropriate. You work for me. You owe me $40,000. There are 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea." She didn't move away. "But I need you to know that when Richard presents his case tomorrow, he's not completely wrong. I did hire you because of personal feelings. I just didn't realize it until now." Before James could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Rebecca stepped back, and the moment fractured. Gerald appeared in the doorway, stopping short when he saw them both. "Didn't expect anyone here this early. Got Richard's email about the emergency meeting. Wanted to talk to you before it happens, Ms. Hayes." Rebecca's expression shifted back to CEO mode. "Come in, Gerald. James and I were just discussing strategy." Gerald entered, carrying his own copy of Richard's timeline. "This is garbage. Political maneuvering disguised as corporate governance. Richard's been after your position since the day you took it. The timeline itself is accurate. We can't dispute the facts. Facts without context are lies. James earned his position. I was in both interviews. I made the hiring recommendation. Rebecca didn't override me or pressure me. She abstained from the salary discussion entirely to avoid exactly this kind of accusation." James felt something loosen in his chest. Gerald's testimony would carry weight. He'd been with Hayes Technologies for 30 years, had no reason to cover for either of them. "Will you say that at the board meeting?" Rebecca asked. "I'll say it and more. I'll present the facility savings James has already generated. The HVAC crisis he solved in 4 hours that would have cost us 6 figures in lost server time. The vendor contracts he's renegotiated." Gerald set down his folder. "Richard can question the optics all he wants. The numbers don't lie." After Gerald left, Rebecca turned back to James. "You should go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." "What are you going to do?" "Prepare my own presentation. Make sure the board understands exactly what happened and why." She paused. "James, regardless of what I said before, about personal feelings, I need you to know that your qualifications were real. I didn't invent your competence to justify hiring you." "I know." "Do you?" Because after tomorrow, half the people in this building are going to think you slept your way into this position." The words stung despite their clinical delivery. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. So do you. So does Gerald. That's enough. He left before she could argue. Drove home through morning traffic that felt heavier than usual. Sarah was already at school, Margaret had handled drop-off, and the empty duplex felt wrong. Too quiet. Too full of questions he couldn't answer. His phone rang. Not Rebecca this time. A number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, this is Dorothy Miller. We met briefly at the hospital after Sarah's surgery." James's chest tightened. Dorothy was Linda's mother, a woman who'd been devastated by her daughter's death and had kept careful distance from James's life ever since. "Mrs. Miller, is everything all right?" "Margaret called me, said you're in some kind of trouble at work, said it involves the woman who paid for Sarah's surgery." Dorothy's voice carried the weight of a mother who'd lost too much. "I'd like to meet her. This Rebecca. Today, if possible." "I don't think—" "James, baby, listen to me. I'm 70 years old. I've buried my husband and my daughter. My granddaughter is all I have left of Linda. If this woman is going to be part of Sarah's life, I need to know who she is." There was no arguing with that logic. James called Rebecca, explained the situation, and she agreed immediately to meet them for lunch. They chose a diner halfway between the office and Dorothy's apartment, neutral territory that didn't carry the weight of corporate politics or family history. Dorothy arrived first, a small woman in her late 60s who'd aged 10 years since Linda's funeral. She wore Linda's purple scarf, the one Sarah had refused to let go of until James had convinced her that Grandma needed it more, and carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd survived everything life could throw at her. Rebecca showed up 5 minutes later, and James watched Dorothy's eyes take in everything: the expensive but understated clothes, the way Rebecca carried herself, the exhaustion that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Mrs. Miller," Rebecca extended her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." Dorothy shook, and her grip was stronger than her frame suggested. "You're the woman who tried to kill herself on the Riverside Bridge." Rebecca didn't flinch. "Yes, ma'am. And now you're my son-in-law's boss, and you paid for my granddaughter's surgery." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question was simple. The answer was anything but. Rebecca glanced at James, then back to Dorothy. "Because James saved my life, and I wanted to save his daughter's. Because I had the money and he needed it. Because for the first time in 2 years, I saw a way to do something good instead of something profitable." Dorothy studied her for a long moment. "My daughter died because her husband was in a meeting he thought was more important than answering her calls. You know about that?" "James told me." "Then you understand that I don't trust people who put work before family. I don't trust CEOs who show up in nice suits talking about doing good, and I especially don't trust women who insert themselves into widowers' lives when grief makes them vulnerable." Rebecca absorbed the words without deflecting. "You're right not to trust me. I'm all those things you described, but I'm also someone who's trying to learn how to be human again, and James and Sarah are teaching me. I can't promise I won't mess it up. I can promise I care about them both too much to let my mistakes hurt them." "Care about them how? As charity cases? As redemption projects? As people who make me want to be better than I am?" Dorothy was quiet. The waitress came, took orders no one was really hungry for, left them in tense silence. Finally, Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Linda, heavily pregnant, smiling at the camera with the kind of joy that came from believing everything would work out. This was 3 weeks before Sarah was born. Linda knew something was wrong with her heart, knew she might not survive. "She made me promise that if anything happened, I'd make sure James found someone who could love him and Sarah both." Dorothy slid the photo across the table to Rebecca. She said, "Find him someone who sees his heart, not his struggle." Rebecca picked up the photo, studied Linda's face. She was beautiful. She was my whole world, and Sarah is all I have left of her. Dorothy's voice cracked. So I'm asking you, not as a CEO but as a woman, do you see his heart? Or do you see a man you can save to make yourself feel less broken? Rebecca set down the photo carefully. I see both. I see a man who jumped into freezing water without hesitation, who loves his daughter enough to swallow his pride and accept help he didn't want. Who makes me believe that good people still exist, and maybe I could be one of them? She met Dorothy's eyes. And yes, I'm using him to feel less broken. But he's using me too, to prove Sarah can have a future that includes more than grief. We're both getting something out of this. I just hope it's enough. Dorothy reached across the table and took Rebecca's hand. Then you have my blessing. But mess this up, hurt my grandbaby or my son-in-law, and you'll answer to a 70-year-old woman with nothing left to lose. Rebecca's laugh was surprised and genuine. Yes, ma'am, I understand. They ate lunch, making small talk about Sarah's recovery, about school, about anything that didn't touch on the board meeting tomorrow. When they parted, Dorothy hugged James and whispered in his ear, She's good for you, baby. Linda would approve. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything he'd say to the board, practicing arguments, anticipating objections. By 3 a.m., he gave up and went to the kitchen where Linda's photo kept watch over their life. Tomorrow I'm going to fight for a job I've had for 3 weeks. Fight to keep working for a woman who paid $40,000 to save our daughter. Fight to prove I'm more than some rescue project. He touched the frame. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Don't know if this whole situation is me moving on or me making the same mistakes that cost me you. I just know that when I'm with Rebecca, I feel like maybe I deserve to be happy again. His phone lit up. Rebecca. Can't sleep either. Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what happens if we lose. James typed back. Then we lose with dignity. We tell the truth and let the board decide. Her response came quickly. I'm terrified of losing you, both of you. James stared at the message, at the admission she'd probably never make face to face. He thought about telling her he was terrified too, that Sarah asked about her constantly, that his empty refrigerator had started bothering him because Rebecca's was emptier, that somewhere in the chaos of the last 6 weeks she'd stopped being the woman he saved and started being someone he couldn't imagine losing. Instead he wrote, Get some sleep. We face this together tomorrow. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the executive conference room. James arrived at 8:30 wearing his funeral suit, carrying a folder with his own documentation. Energy savings, vendor contracts, crisis response times, evidence that he was good at his job regardless of how he'd gotten it. Rebecca was already there, standing at the window in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than James made in a month. She turned when he entered, and her expression was armored. CEO, Rebecca, not the woman who'd admitted she was terrified. Gerald's presenting first, then Richard, then me. You'll go last if we need you. I'm ready. James, if this goes badly, if they vote to terminate you, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. I made choices that put us both in this position. We made choices, together. That's what matters. Board members started arriving. Patricia Moore first, the CFO who'd approved James's facilities budget. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the board chair who'd been with Hayes Technologies since its founding. 8 others James recognized from company materials but had never met. And Richard, arriving last with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Gerald stood at the head of the table. Before we begin, I want to address the allegations Mr. Hayes has raised about Mr. Cole's hiring. I conducted both interviews personally. Ms. Hayes was not present for either. Mr. Cole's qualifications exceeded our requirements. His facilities optimization plan projects $2 million in savings over 10 years. In his first month, he's already generated $400,000 in energy reduction and emergency repair prevention. The board voted to create the VP of Facilities position based on business need, not personal favor. Richard smiled. No one's questioning Mr. Cole's performance. We're questioning the circumstances of his hiring. Gerald, Were you aware that Ms. Hayes personally paid $40,000 for Mr. Cole's daughter's surgery 2 days before his second interview? I was not aware of the specifics of the timing. Were you aware that Ms. Hayes met Mr. Cole when he saved her from a suicide attempt? I knew they'd met under unusual circumstances. Unusual. Richard pulled out his timeline, projected it on the screen. Let's review what unusual means. October 15th, Ms. Hayes attempts suicide. Mr. Cole saves her. Same day, his daughter has a cardiac emergency. October 18th, Ms. Hayes visits Mr. Cole's home uninvited. October 20th, she takes him to coffee. October 25th, first interview. October 26th, Ms. Hayes wires $40,000 to pay for the daughter's surgery. October 28th, Mr. Cole defends Ms. Hayes at a board meeting while the girl is still recovering. November 1st, he's hired at $95,000 a year. Richard paused, let the timeline sink in. Now, I don't doubt Mr. Cole is competent, but this sequence suggests Miss Hayes created a position and hired someone who was financially and emotionally indebted to her. That's not business. That's buying loyalty. Patricia Moore leaned forward. Rebecca, is this timeline accurate? Rebecca stood, and James watched her transform, not into CEO armor, into something more honest. Yes. Everything Richard presented is factually accurate. James did save my life. His daughter did need surgery I paid for. I did hire him weeks later. What Richard's timeline doesn't show is what happened between those events. She pulled out her own folder. October 15th, I offered James $50,000. He refused, said he doesn't save people for money. October 18th, I offered him a job at $120,000. He refused, said he wouldn't owe me his career. October 20th, I revised my offer to include an interview process where I wouldn't be present. He accepted only because his daughter needed surgery insurance wouldn't approve. October 26th, James tried to refuse the surgery payment. I convinced him to accept it as a 7-year loan at $500 a month, 0 interest. We have a signed contract. Rebecca looked at each board member. James didn't ask me for anything. Not money, not a job, not special treatment. Everything he has, he negotiated on terms that protected his dignity. And yes, I hired him knowing I cared about him and his daughter, but I hired him because he's good at what he does, because Gerald recommended him, because this company needed someone competent who could save us millions. Richard wasn't finished. You're admitting to personal feelings for an employee? I'm admitting that I value someone who showed me that life is worth living, who taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, who makes me want to be better than the version of myself that stood on a bridge ready to die. Rebecca's voice didn't waver. Fire me for that if you want. But don't pretend James is anything other than exactly what Gerald said, an excellent hire who happens to have saved my life. Dr. Walsh cleared her throat. Rebecca, no one's questioning your judgment in crisis, but Richard raises valid concerns about conflicts of interest. How do we know future decisions regarding Mr. Cole will be based on performance rather than personal attachment? James stood before Rebecca could answer. May I speak? Dr. Walsh nodded. James moved to the front of the room, very aware that he was the only person in jeans and work boots, while everyone else wore suits that cost more than his monthly rent. 3 years ago, my wife called me twice while I was in a meeting. I sent her to voicemail because I thought impressing a client was more important than answering my phone. She died before I could call back. I've spent 3 years wondering if those 2 minutes would have saved her life. He looked at Richard. You want to know why I walked out of my first interview? Because the hospital called about my daughter, and I'd promised myself I'd never choose work over family again. That choice cost me the interview. Should have cost me the job. But Ms. Hayes gave me a second chance because she understood. James pulled out his own documentation. You're right that the timeline looks suspicious. But here's what you're not seeing. I turned down more money from Rebecca Hayes than most people make in a year. Negotiated my own salary down to avoid nepotism. Signed a loan contract with payment terms. Built a facilities plan that's already saving this company hundreds of thousands. I don't owe my position to personal feelings. I owe it to being good at my job. Patricia studied the documents. The energy savings alone justify the hire. But do they justify the risk? Richard pressed. What happens when Ms. Hayes' personal feelings cloud her judgment on performance reviews, promotions, budget allocation? We're setting a precedent that personal relationships can influence corporate decisions. Then set a different precedent. James's voice was steady. Make it clear that I report to Gerald, not Rebecca. That performance reviews go through HR. That any future raises have to be board approved. Put whatever safeguards you need in place. But don't fire someone for being good at their job just because the circumstances of their hiring make you uncomfortable. Dr. Walsh looked at Rebecca. Would you agree to those terms? Removing yourself from James's direct supervision? Yes. Gerald can be his direct supervisor. HR can handle reviews. I'll abstain from any decision involving his employment. And the personal relationship? Richard's tone was sharp. Are you planning to continue pursuing that? Rebecca met James's eyes. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with Sarah's drawings on her refrigerator and late-night texts and the terrifying possibility that maybe they could build something real. That's not the board's business. What happens outside this office is between James and me. Richard leaned back. Then I moved to terminate both Ms. Hayes and Mr. Cole. She's demonstrated a pattern of emotional decision-making that compromises her ability to lead. He's demonstrated he's willing to benefit from that compromised judgment. I second the motion, one of Richard's allies added. Dr. Walsh looked around the table. We have a motion and a second. Discussion before we vote? Patricia raised her hand. I've worked with Rebecca for 20 years. I've seen her make hard decisions that prioritize this company over personal comfort. She stayed on as CEO after her husband's suicide when she could have walked away. She's tripled our value while dealing with grief that would have destroyed most people. One complicated hiring decision doesn't erase 2 years of excellent leadership. It sets a dangerous precedent, Richard countered. Today it's hiring someone she has feelings for. Tomorrow it's what? Awarding contracts to friends? Making decisions based on emotion rather than fiduciary responsibility? Or maybe it sets a precedent that we value leaders who are human. Gerald's voice cut through the argument. Rebecca made a judgment call that a competent facilities manager was worth hiring despite complicated circumstances. James has proven her judgment was correct. We can create oversight to address the conflict. But firing them both sends a message that this company punishes people for being honest about caring for each other. The room went quiet. Dr. Walsh called for a vote. All in favor of terminating Rebecca Hayes as CEO and James Cole as VP of Facilities? 3 hands went up, Richard and 2 others. All opposed? 8 hands, Patricia, Gerald, Dr. Walsh, and 5 others. Motion fails. Rebecca Hayes remains CEO. James Cole remains VP of Facilities with the understanding that supervision transfers to Gerald Stevens and all employment decisions go through HR. Dr. Walsh looked at both of them. We're trusting you to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. Don't make us regret it. After the board members filed out, James found himself alone with Rebecca in the conference room. She was gathering her papers with hands that trembled slightly, and when she finally looked at him, her eyes were bright. We won. Barely. Barely's enough. She moved closer. James, what I said about personal feelings, I know. I feel it too. What do we do about it? James thought about Sarah asking if Rebecca would be her new mama. Thought about Dorothy's blessing. Thought about Linda's photo on his wall and the promise he'd made to stay open to life. We figure it out. Slowly. Carefully. With rules that protect Sarah from getting hurt if this doesn't work. And if it does work? Then we build something real. Something that honors where we've been and believes in where we're going. Rebecca's smile was tentative, hopeful. I'd like that. They left the building together, and James drove to the elementary school where Sarah was waiting for pickup. She climbed into the truck, chattering about a project in art class, and James listened with the kind of attention he'd learned grief demanded. Every moment mattered. Every conversation was precious. "Can Miss Rebecca come for dinner tonight?" Sarah asked as they pulled into the driveway. James glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter's hopeful face. "Yeah, baby, I think she can." That evening, Rebecca showed up with groceries and a determination to actually cook something edible. She and James worked together in the kitchen that had been Linda's domain, and it felt right instead of wrong, like Linda's memory could coexist with new possibilities. Sarah set the table with careful precision, making sure Rebecca's plate had the fork on the correct side. They ate pasta that was only slightly overcooked, and Sarah talked about soccer tryouts and her friend Emma's new puppy, and whether Miss Rebecca wanted to come to the school's fall festival. After dinner, Sarah asked Rebecca to read bedtime stories. Rebecca looked at James, seeking permission, and he nodded. They went upstairs together, leaving James alone with the dishes and the quiet knowledge that his life was changing in ways he hadn't planned but couldn't prevent. When Rebecca came back down, her mascara was smudged. She asked if I was going to stay. I didn't know what to tell her. "What do you want to tell her?" "That I'm scared I'll ruin this. That I don't know how to be what she needs. That every good thing I've ever had, I've destroyed through neglect or obsession or choosing work over people." James dried his hands, turned to face her. "Then don't choose work. Choose us. Scared and uncertain and figuring it out as we go." Rebecca moved into his space, and this time when she stood close enough to touch, James didn't step back. "I'm falling in love with you. With Sarah. With this life that feels real instead of performed. And it terrifies me." "Good. Fear means it matters." She smiled at him, echoing her own words back. "You're using my lines. Learning from the best." They stood in his kitchen surrounded by dishes and Sarah's drawings on the refrigerator and the ghost of Linda's memory that felt like blessing instead of burden. And when Rebecca kissed him, soft and tentative and full of possibility, James kissed back with the understanding that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant making room for what came next. 18 months later, James stood on the riverside bridge with Rebecca beside him and Sarah holding both their hands. The October air was crisp, the river flowing dark below them, exactly like the day he jumped in to save a stranger who'd become family. "This is where it started," Rebecca said quietly, "where I thought ending was the only option." Sarah looked up at her. "But Daddy saved you, and then you saved me, and now we're all saved together." The simplicity of 7-year-old logic made both adults smile. James thought about the board meeting, about the compromises they'd made, about the slow, careful building of something that looked like forever. Rebecca had moved into a house 3 blocks away, close enough to be present, far enough to maintain boundaries until they were sure. She came for dinner most nights, attended Sarah's soccer games, learned to cook meals that didn't come from YouTube tutorials. The company was thriving. James's facilities plan had saved even more than projected. Rebecca had implemented mental health resources for all employees, speaking publicly about her own struggles in ways that made the board uncomfortable but made the workforce loyal. Richard had resigned rather than work under someone he considered emotionally compromised. But the real measure of success wasn't corporate. It was this: Sarah's laughter. Rebecca's smile that reached her eyes. The way James woke up most mornings believing that maybe happiness wasn't something he'd used up with Linda. "I brought something." Rebecca pulled a white rose from her bag. "For the river. For the version of me who thought dying was easier than living." She tossed it into the current, and they watched it drift downstream, carrying away the grief and guilt and fear that had brought them all to this bridge. Sarah threw in a purple flower. "For Mama, so she knows we're okay." And James added his own silent goodbye to the man he'd been before. They walked back to James's truck, Sarah skipping ahead, Rebecca's hand warm in his. At home, Linda's photos still hung on the walls because Sarah needed them there. But Rebecca's drawings had joined them. Her coffee mug sat in the cabinet. Her jacket hung by the door, small markers of a life being built one careful choice at a time. That night, after Sarah was asleep, Rebecca and James sat on the couch that had been Linda's favorite spot. Rebecca leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they existed in comfortable silence that didn't need words. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Rebecca admitted, "for some crisis that proves I'm still too broken for this. We're all broken. That's what makes us fit. Margaret's words, Margaret's wisdom." Rebecca tilted her head to look at him. "I want to ask you something, but I'm terrified of the answer." "Ask anyway." "Will you marry me?" James's breath caught. Not because the question surprised him. They'd been building toward this for months. Because hearing it out loud made it real. Made it a choice he had to make consciously instead of drifting toward inevitably. "Say it again." He used her own demand for vulnerability, watching her face shift from fear to understanding. "Will you marry me, James Cole? Will you let me be part of this family officially? Will you trust that I won't choose work over you and Sarah? Will you believe that I'm done running from the things that matter?" James thought about the bridge, about the choice he'd made in 3 seconds that had led to this moment, about Linda's promise that he'd stay open to life, about Sarah upstairs who asked every week when Miss Rebecca was going to be Mama R for real. "Yes, on one condition." "Name it." "We get married on October 15th, 3 years to the day after I pulled you out of that river. 3 anniversaries on one date. Linda's death, your rescue, our wedding." Rebecca's eyes filled. "You'd do that? Put our wedding on the same day you lost your wife?" "Linda made me who I am. You make me believe I can be more. Both of you shaped me. Both matter. I don't want to choose between honoring the past and building the future." She kissed him, and it tasted like tears and hope and the understanding that love didn't have capacity limits, that hearts could hold grief and joy simultaneously, that choosing to be happy again didn't betray the people who'd made happiness possible. When they told Sarah the next morning, she screamed with excitement loud enough to wake Margaret next door. She insisted on being flower girl and wearing purple and making sure Grandma Dorothy sat in the front row. She drew invitation designs featuring stick figures and hearts and wrote "My Family" in careful letters across the top. The wedding happened exactly as planned. October 15th. Small ceremony at Cedar Street Church, where James had buried Linda and where Sarah had been baptized. Margaret cried through the entire service. Dorothy sat in the front row wearing Linda's purple scarf and smiling through her own tears. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," Sarah yelled, "Finally!" and the whole church laughed. That night, in the house they'd bought together with a yard big enough for Sarah's soccer practice and Linda's photos still on the walls and room for Rebecca's piano that was slowly losing its dust, James found his daughter in her bedroom arranging her collection of drawings. "You okay, baby?" Sarah looked up, gap-toothed smile bright. "I was just thinking about Mama, how she'd be happy we found Mama R." "You think so?" "I know so, because Mama loved us, and people who love you want you to be happy. That's what you always say." James sat on her bed, pulled her into a hug. "When'd you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." After Sarah was asleep, James found Rebecca in the kitchen making tea. She'd changed out of her wedding dress into comfortable clothes, and her hair was down, and she looked more at peace than he'd ever seen her. "3 years ago I jumped into a river for a stranger," James said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Best decision I ever made." Rebecca leaned back against him. 3 years ago I tried to die. Worst decision I almost made. And now? Now I'm married to a man who teaches me that strength comes in forms I never learned in business school, who shows me that accepting help isn't weakness, who makes me believe that broken things can build beautiful lives if you fit them together carefully. They stood in their kitchen, not Linda's anymore, not Rebecca's alone, but theirs, and watched the October moon rise over the city. Somewhere in the distance, the Riverside River flowed on. But they weren't drowning anymore. They were building a family from grief and second chances and the kind of love that asks hard questions and gives honest answers. Sarah appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Can't sleep. Too excited." Rebecca opened her arms, and Sarah ran into them. James joined the hug, and the three of them stood there. Father, daughter, and the woman who'd learned that family wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about making room for what came next. "Tell me about Mama," Sarah whispered to James. "The stories." So James told stories about Linda's terrible singing and her love of purple and the way she'd believed every child deserved a champion. Rebecca listened, holding Sarah close, making space for Linda's memory, because she understood now that love wasn't a competition. It was a legacy, something that passed from one person to the next, growing instead of diminishing. And when Sarah finally fell asleep between them on the couch, neither adult moved. They just sat there in the quiet house with Linda's photos watching and Rebecca's drawings joining them and the future spreading out ahead like a promise they'd earned the right to believe in. James thought about the bridge, about the river that had tried to take Rebecca and given him family instead, about how 3 seconds of choice had led to 3 years of healing, had led to this moment of absolute certainty that sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. The river hadn't won. Love had. Not perfect love. Real love. The kind that sees damage and says, "I'm staying anyway." The kind that jumps into freezing water without hesitation. The kind that builds families from broken pieces and calls it beautiful because it is.